Okay. We're recording now. So, tonight's class is on Zionism. Thank you for being my student. Unfortunately, I don't have a whiteboard, so I won't be able to write stuff up there. However, I do have some nice handouts and stuff. One last thing we have to wrap up from last class, which is because we got carried away completely on the whole Christian theology. There is an idea that there is a war, that a final battle that's going to happen where all the nations of the world come against the Jewish people in the land of Israel. This is after the Jews have gone back to the land of Israel, which has already largely happened. Almost half of the Jews in the world now live in the land of Israel. And it's sometime around the coming of the Messiah, whether it comes right before or during this war. This war is known as the war of Gog, G-O-G, and Magog. Gog is the king's name, the leader of this nation, and Magog is the nation. They bring along a lot of the rest of the world with them to attack the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are miraculously saved. This is the final battle. In English, they have the term Armageddon. Have you ever heard the term Armageddon?
No.
Armageddon comes from the New Testament, that they believe that there's going to be a final battle at the mountain of Megiddo in the land of Israel. We don't have that same tradition. The battle is the battle is mentioned in Ezekiel 38, which I'm not going to go through. I just wanted to mention that such a thing exists. So if you look up Ezekiel 38 and I think 39, you can read all about the battle of Gog and Magog. There was one other thing that I was thinking when I was driving home. Oh, I should mention that. Remember. Okay. So we basically have now wrapped up all of the philosophy of Judaism. What do we believe in? Why do we believe it? Where we differ from other worldviews, particularly Christianity. I know it's very, very hard for you because you don't have that Christian build-up where I just have to tell you, oh, it's not this, it's that. But we've gotten all the basics down. So now we're going to go from the ideas into the land of practicality. How does this play out? We're going to have a class on the commandments, kind of the daily life and yearly life of how we live. This class kind of fits into that. There was this idea, as we said, about a Mashiach coming, about a return to the land of Israel, rebuilding the land of Israel, rebuilding the temple. And there was a movement, there was a secular movement that started in the 1800s to say, we're not going to wait around for this Messiah anymore. We should just go and try and do it. And this movement is called Zionism. Now, at the time, every nationalism was a growing and fairly new idea. There was Pan-Slavism. All of the Slavs, meaning the Russians, the Ukrainians, all these groups should get together and form one united nationalist idea. They had different countries because of World War I being formed. And what's that? Oh, I thought there was somebody here. You had these different countries being formed after World War I that didn't exist before, and they were trying to figure out how do we break apart, this people group from this people that have been living next to each other. So how do we divide up land, make everything kind of peaceful? They started the League of Nations at this time, and into this mix falls a man named Herzl, Benjamin Herzl. And Herzl attends a trial that is supposedly the reason that he gives for his really spearheading this movement. He witnesses a trial in France of this man named Dreyfus. Dreyfus was a French Jew who was I forget what I think I want to say he was a major in the French military, and he was accused of treason and convicted. And he was convicted because they had this letter that was just signed with the letter D. And it became apparent afterwards that it was another man completely that had done it. They really had no evidence against Dreyfus, but because he was Jewish and he was in a high place, the trial was completely rigged. Herzl saw this, and he said, okay, there's no hope. He said, we have to do something about this anti-Semitism. His idea was, people don't like Jews, right? That's what anti-Semitism means, even though the term Semite means Arab Jews, a lot of other groups. The term anti-Semitic specifically refers to hating Jews. He said that the reason that people hate us is because we're not normal like the other nations. We don't have our own land and our own language and everything. If we had our own land with our own army in our own nation, then people would respect us. And nobody would dislike us ever again. A lot of what Herzl said never worked out. But he spearheaded a movement that was already growing. And that movement mixed with the socialism that was also spreading. This is before the Russian Revolution, where socialism became very popular among large groups of people. I mean, China got overtaken by it, Russia got overtaken by it, and there were other groups around the world that were trying to instigate for it. They felt it was much fairer than the system that had come before it, and also it was at that time completely theoretical. So of course it's better, because nobody's ever done it. So Herzl witnesses this trial in 1894. And in 1896, he writes Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state. It's translated into Hebrew with the name Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is an obscure name which comes out of the Bible. And because of that, when they named Tel Aviv, which was the first all-Jewish city in Israel, they named it Tel Aviv after his book. There was also a rise in pogroms at the time in the 1890s. There was a wave of anti-Semitism throughout Russia and the Polish and Poland and the Ukraine and everywhere. My ancestors came over at that time in the late 1800s. There was a move by some to go to the land of Israel starting in the 1880s. There was also a move to create, because of this idea of socialism and everything, let's buy land in the land of Israel and create little settlements. And there'll be socialist settlements. We'll have people live there, and they'll, grow crops together. The first little town that they did this in was called Rishon LeZion, which means the first to Zion. Zion literally Zion refers to the Temple Mount, where the big gold dome is in Jerusalem, but it can refer to all of the land of Israel too. It kind of has, that's what it literally means, and then kind of has a broader meaning, and that's where the term Zionism comes from. From 1517 until 1917, the Ottoman Turks ruled all of Arabia and pretty much all of the Middle East, the great Ottoman Empire, and they ruled the land of Israel. In 1906, David Ben-Gurion came over, and he later became the first prime minister of Israel, but he was also an instigator all along the way of creating this Jewish state. Now originally, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. So until 1917, so he came under the Ottoman Turks, David Ben-Gurion, from Poland, and there was a wave of immigrants from different areas, If you came from Poland, you were outside of the Ottoman Empire, and so it was more difficult to get in, but they would let you. You often had to bribe the right people. So in 1917, the Turks lose the First World War, and it's taken over. The land is taken over by the British. The League of Nations divides up the Middle East into different big blocks for administrative purposes. Different countries got a certain block. So Syria got, France got what's called Syria. Now if you look at Syria here, you'll see that it actually consists largely of Lebanon and Syria. The British got what they called Palestine, and Iraq, and I don't know who was, Egypt was under its own, actually the British were in Egypt, but I think, I don't know when they got their own area, and then you had Saudi Arabia. So this is basically, it's labeled down here, this is the area allocated for the Jewish National Home at the San Remo Conference in 1920. So there was a man named Weitzman, who was a Jew who was an immigrant to Britain, and I don't think I ever wrote down what he was. He became famous for a chemical process. He was a chemist. I think he made acetone that they used in creating munitions. And it was something that they couldn't, until that point, they had to get it from some natural source, and once they were able to synthesize it, it had a huge impact on their war preparations. So this is all during the First World War. He becomes very famous during the First World War, and he became the spokesman in Britain for the Zionism idea. Now to him, it's not quite clear exactly what Zionism was supposed to mean. At least to me it's not. It definitely involves Jews going to the land of Israel. However, whether they were going to have a national home of their, whether they were going to have a state, whether they were going to have an autonomous area that was ruled by another state, is unclear. What people they were constantly maneuvering to try and figure out what they could get and make the most of that. So Weitzman has a huge influence, and in 1917, if you'll take a look at this page, this is a photocopy from, I just got this off of Wikipedia as an image. This is the copy of the Balfour Declaration. Lord Balfour writes, they were pressuring them to create a Jewish home, and Lord Balfour, who was in the government of Britain at the time, said, "Dear Lord Rothschild," now Rothschild was a French Jew who's also very influential on these settlements. He basically put up a lot of money. He was a very successful businessman, and he owned wineries in France. So I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with the Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. They also say here that you have to respect the non-Jewish communities, but it wasn't clear exactly what that meant. They just, they didn't want any trouble. So the area that was put aside, right, that was considered a Palestine in those days is this huge area that encompasses what we now know as, what we now call the Kingdom of Jordan, Israel, Israel, what they call the Green Line Israel, what's now internationally respected as Israel, the West Bank, which is a huge chunk over here, and the Gaza Strip, which is over here. All that was considered Palestine. If you look at biblical maps, which I don't have have any copies of those. But in the Bible, the cutoff for the bottom part of the land of Israel actually went somewhere along here, and there was this area to the east that isn't really demarcated where exactly it ends. But everybody at the time considered this Palestine. When they talked about Palestine, they meant this entire area, both the west side of the Jordan and the east side. Jordan was supposed to be part of the Jewish national home, and everyone agreed that that was the case. That's what we meant by Palestine. All right, come along.
How about Jordan? What's the area?
There was no Jordan. So the thing is that the Turks ruled the entire area. They had districts maybe, but I think Israel was considered part of Syria or something like that. They had districts for running it, but there was no national countries because it was all ruled by one big empire. So there was no kingdom of Jordan. The British wanted to repay the Arabs, and the Arabs didn't want any Jews moving in. So I have another map. No, that's the same one. I know I had it. There's a Alright, well, you can see it on a different map. Basically, they cut off the everything from the Jordan River over and gave it to. They created a kingdom of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. That was in 1922. The British were trying. The British now controlled this huge area that was oil producing. They were worried about that, as everybody always is about the oil producing countries. The oil producing areas did not want Jews moving in there. They also, have you ever heard of the movie Lawrence of Arabia? In an effort to overthrow to combat the Turks, the British basically co-opted the Arabs to fight back against the people ruling them. So when they won, they felt they owed them something, and so they gave in 1922, just 5 years after this Balfour Declaration, they gave 72% of the land. Sorry, it's more than that. It was 70. I think it was 76% of the land to that they had designated as the Jewish national home. They gave it away to Jordan. There was nothing that the Zionists could really do. In 1929, there's been all this back and forth. The Arabs didn't want the Jews there. In 1929, the Arabs riot and they kill 70 in Hebron. Hebron, have you ever heard of Hebron? Hebron is a town. It's important Judaically because the patriarchs, when we talked about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their wives, they're all buried there. It's a city south of Jerusalem, and it always had a Jewish presence until 1929, when the Arabs rioted. The British did not really lend a finger to help, although they managed to evacuate 700 Jews out of there. 70 died in it, and they basically destroyed any Judaism in Hebron. In the 1936, the Arabs start to revolt against the British. Now, let me go back a sec. In World War I, the British also wanted they're trying to get anybody on their side. So they also created a legion for Jews. They really didn't do much, partially because of anti-Semitism, also because it came so late. But David Ben-Gurion, who was in the United States during World War I, went back and offered his services along with a bunch of other people. They got shipped to Egypt, but they didn't see any action because the war had ended. I believe even through 1936 and through 1939, is you had Jews serving in the British military. The Arab Revolt also targeted Jews, and a number of them were killed. I don't have the numbers on that. In 1939, they published a white paper. The British wanted to make sure that the Arabs supported them. They needed the oil. World War II was looming, and they permanently reduced Jewish immigration to be restricted to no more than 75,000 over the following 5 years, and none thereafter without the consent of the Arab population. So instead of allowing unlimited immigrants in and trying to build up the Jewish home, they said you can have 75,000 over 5 years, and that's it. After that, no more Jewish immigrants, unless the Arabs want to let you in, which of course the Arabs didn't. Now nothing stopped Arab immigrants coming from other areas, and the Zionist, both the Zionist and the people who were just trying to make a living there, these communities, they hired a lot of Arab workers, and there was an influx of Arabs during that time. So now we come to the end of World War II. The Holocaust has happened. Did you learn about the Holocaust in China?
Yeah.
So 6 million Jews were destroyed. Now in the world we only have 13 million. I forget what the percentage was at the time. I think it was about half also then. I may be wrong about that. And nobody wanted them. You had all these displaced persons camps around Europe because Poland, they couldn't go back to their homes. Their homes had been either ransacked or were inhabited by other people. There were pogroms. They killed, I was just watching a video on it, I forget the numbers, but in like one town I think they wiped out like 64 people who tried to come back to their homes. The Poles didn't want them. All these other countries, they didn't want them. They wound up in these camps. America, Canada, and Great Britain. Great Britain, it was also because they had set this policy for immigration in the land of Israel, it also applied to Great Britain as a whole, which meant Australia, Canada, all the places that were under South Africa, all the places that were under British control, because as far as I understand it, this is an assumption, is that once you got into a Great British area, you could go from place to place within it. So they limited immigration. The U.S. wouldn't take them. You had hundreds of thousands, I believe, people living in these camps, and it was in complete squalor. The Eleanor Roosevelt went to visit in I don't have the year. Eleanor Roosevelt went to visit, and this woman grabbed onto her, this old woman, and she said she kneeled down in the mud and just said Palestina, Palestina. She said it was the first time I understood what's going on, because nobody spoke English, and she didn't speak Yiddish or German or any other language that would have been useful. So after several recommendations trying to figure out what to do, the British didn't want an out, so they turned over the problem to the newly formed United Nations. They said, whatever you decide, fine. So the United Nations came up with a plan to divide the land of Israel. This is the map I was looking for. Into 2 areas. Do you have this one?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, everything that's in dark is Jewish. Everything that's in white, it would be the Arab state. And the Jerusalem was supposed to be a UN administrated like didn't belong to anybody. The UN's always been very tough because, you know, as soon as somebody shoots at them, they go, okay, you go ahead, right? Yep, right there. It should have surprised nobody that wasn't going to last, although I don't know that the UN had any action at that time. You have a big problem with the UN because you have a bunch of soldiers who belong to other countries that have no involvement and are sent there as tokens. So if you're Chinese and you get sent to the middle of a battlefield between two groups who you don't even know what they're saying because you don't speak the language, and they start shooting at each other, you're going to get out of the way. Why would you stick your neck out and try and fight for whatever side that they told you, oh, we're supposed to be here to defend? It has nothing to do with me. I can't win. I can't win for losing. So the area right here is the Gaza Strip. And like I said, most of the area, and this is the area that's the West Bank. Most of this area right here is the West Bank. The thing is that most of the Jewish interesting sites are in here.
Yeah.
In this white area. I think Jaffa was actually under, if I remember correctly, Jaffa itself was supposed to be under Arab control. The stuff along the coast, it wasn't very fertile land. Most of the fertile land was over here. And all this area, this big area down here that they got so much of, is actually all desert. So they were very proficient at coming up with farming methods in the desert, but you see that most of Israel at that time would then be desert. The UN signed on to this in 1947, and the Jews celebrated. The Arabs walked out, and they said over our dead bodies, and there's then started a mini war. Actually, I think that started really the War of Independence. The Jews and Arabs started fighting each other, and the Jews were fighting for their lives. They were vastly outnumbered. I don't have the numbers. They made up, I think, about 20-something% of the population. Maybe 30. Maybe I think it was in the 30s by then. They made up about 30. Let's say about 30% about 1/3 of the population. And they're fighting for their lives because they have nowhere else to go. If you drive the Arabs back, they go into Jordan, they go into Syria. You know, it's not good for them, but it's not so bad. One of the things I was listening to a history thing on YouTube yesterday is that the Arabs had always been used to wars of empire, meaning the foreign troops are coming in, we leave our homes. When they're done, we can come back to our homes. So they packed up and left. Now, the British had said they were going to leave in August 1948. They moved it up to May. An interesting story I heard is that they were pulling out on the midnight of basically May 15th. So just as May 15th came in, the British were going to pull out. That was a Friday night. The Jewish Sabbath is on Friday night and Saturday. So Ben Gurion went to the British and they said, we're going to declare a state, but we can't declare it on the Sabbath. That just despite the fact that most of the people were not religious, most of the people who were running the Zionists, were not religious. They were socialists. They still said, look, we have to have some respect for the tradition and stuff, and we can't announce a Jewish state on the Sabbath. So before the Sabbath, on Friday, May 14th, 1948, they declared their independence. this, because they declared it on Friday, they actually beat the Arabs to it. So they announced the creation of the State of Israel. Now, in April of 1948, right, maybe a month before, President Truman was going to oppose the creation of the State of Israel. The Weizmann wanted to meet with him. So, actually I thought this was before, it's a famous story, but I'm trying to remember if it was before the partition plan. I think it was the independence. America actually said, because the actual partition plan had never really happened, the Arabs hadn't agreed to it, and it had passed the UN, but it was never really implemented. The U.S. was going to favor switching the mandate over to the U.S. The Zionists wanted to meet with, and Weizmann was their big proponent, and the one who spoke English the best and everything. He wanted to meet with Truman, and Truman refused to see him. Truman happened to have owned a shop, a hat shop in Missouri with a Jewish guy. Jewish guy wasn't religious, but Truman had always been impressed with his honesty, and they were both drinking buddies, basically. He was like a good old boy. He could, drink and swear and everything with the best of them. So the way I heard it recently was that, so this guy Eddie Jacobson, he comes to the White House, and when he would come to D.C., he would just drop by the White House because he was drinking buddies with the president. He could get in to see him. They knew to let him in. So he comes to meet Truman, and Truman says, "Before you say anything, I'm not meeting Weizmann." And so they're just shooting the breeze and stuff. He can't think of a way to ask him. He looks out across the lawn, and what more he saw? I want to say he saw the. Oh gosh, I didn't write it down. I just saw it in the video yesterday. I think he saw the one of the memorials. I think it might have been Jefferson or Lincoln. And he said, "I know you've always admired him, and you should meet with Weizmann because he's the Jewish, Abraham Lincoln or something like that." And he said, "You have no right." He swore at him, and he said, "You have no right to do that, but I'll meet him." So Weizmann got in, managed to somehow charm him, and the U.S. flipped their vote. And not only did they flip their vote, but when the state was announced, within hours, the U.S. became the first country to recognize the new state of Israel. This is really just the beginning. The war was still going on, and when it ended, right? So the Jews would have taken the partition plan. They said, "All right, we'll take what you gave us. It's not defensible. It's largely desert, but we'll take what we can get." When it ended, we were that's still wrong map. You have another map, I think. Yes, this one. This is probably the one you recognize from anything today, anything on the news today. So, what had happened was Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, I think also Saudi Arabia sent troops, all sent troops in to attack Israel. They were outnumbered like 10-1. They had like I think a couple of planes, and they had I think a few crop dusters. They had very little weapons. They had stolen a lot of their weapons from the British. They had imported them illegally under the British. Everybody was sure they were going to die. but they managed to capture more territory than was originally given to them. There had been, I mean, there were Jewish settlements, like, you know, kind of all over the place, and some of them, I think 2 of them fell down here, and then I'm not sure if there were any others. I think, you know, the Jews owned, when they were building up the Zionist idea, it isn't like they came in and stole people's land. They didn't have any ability to do so. They came in and they bought a piece of land, and most of the time it was a sand dune. And they managed to irrigate it somehow and, you know, make some crops. So they had other places that they owned. They managed to take over several Arab cities. They took over Haifa, they took over Jaffa. A lot of the Arabs, like I said, fled. Some were driven out, but a lot of them just fled, figuring, okay, when the war is over, we'll come back. They managed to get, there had been an outpost at Jerusalem that fell. Mount Scope, I think Mount Scopus remained this little tiny outpost that they were able to, after the armistice, they were able to ship like people in and out every day with the UN approval. They had to go through Arab land and then go out through a checkpoint. So they basically lost all the important part of the old part of Jerusalem was all gone. Only the new part that was all Jewish, they managed to hold on to. So after 1948, we wound up with the map that, as it currently looks, as you'll see it on TV, where Gaza actually belonged to Egypt, and what we call Yehuda and Shomron, the West Bank, belonged to Jordan. These people had papers from Jordan. There's one guy I work with. His family came from, I think, from Ramallah, right? Came from this area. They left. They were Jordanian, or they had Jordanian papers or whatever. They left for a while. His dad was doing business somewhere else. Had been transferred, and then when the war was over, so they had wound up with Jordanian citizenship. All the people over here considered themselves Palestinian Arabs. Most of what, even today, if you look at like population numbers, most of what's now Jordan is Palestinian Arab. Consider themselves Palestinian Arab. So this is what it stood until 1967. In 1967, there was a movement, like I said, going on about a pan-Arabism. Let's get all the Arabs together. We'll form one big empire, basically. And Egypt was the center of that, under a guy named Nasser. Gamal Nasser. Have you ever heard of him? So there was wars going on. There was a whole thing in Sinai before that, and in 1967, when they started amassing troops, I think Israel owned this, or basically had. Oh no, wait a minute. They had control. No, I don't think they did. Anyways, they started amassing troops on the border, Egypt and Jordan, and Syria, and it was obvious they were going to attack, and Israel figured the only way they're going to win this war is if they strike first. So what they did was they flew in low and went and knocked out the entire Egyptian Air Force. In Syria, the huge tank battles. I think that was the only place they really had any tanks, and they managed in 6 days to capture the Golan Heights, which is this area over here, right here. Sorry, it's already marked. This is the Golan Heights. They managed to capture that. One of the interesting things they have, this is a great story, is that they had a spy in Damascus that he got way up in the military, and he convinced them. This is like, he was discovered, I think, in the mid-50s. However, he had convinced them. He said, they had all these troops stationed up there because it's high, and look down Israel and they would shell from there. He said, it's horrible that our Syrian troops have to sit out in the blazing sun. Let's put eucalyptus trees so that when they have to go outside, they have a shady place to sit under, right? And they said, oh, that's a good idea. So in 1967, even though they had caught him for spying, they had all these eucalyptus trees around the Golan Heights, which is where Israel knew where every single bunker was, because there's a eucalyptus tree right next to it. And it was pretty barren except for that. Israel took over Gaza, the West Bank, all of Sinai, right? So right down to the Suez Canal, and did I say Golan Heights? Yeah, and the Golan Heights. In 1973, so when they talk about pre-67 borders, they're talking about these 1948 borders, not including the Golan Heights, not including the West Bank, not including Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem, the important part of Jerusalem, and not including Gaza. In 1973, the Arabs decided to try again, and they struck on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day of the Jewish year. Even people who don't do anything the rest of the year, this is the day they go to synagogue. The whole country shuts down. You cannot get a bus, even in places that have buses running on the Sabbath, there's nothing. So the whole country is shut down. Everybody's in the synagogue. They let everybody who was non-essential go home. So now they attack from all the different sides again. And there's no way to contact anybody because nobody's near a television, nobody's near a radio, nobody's near a phone. So they had to go from synagogue to synagogue and say, hey, there's a war on, everybody who's in the army, come with me, and call everybody up. What happened was that apparently the Arabs had gotten British help and some other foreigners to help to train their troops, and they taught them that, okay, like you made really good progress, now dig in and wait for the counterattack. So they did, and that's what gave the Israelis time to call people up. If they had just gone straight, they would have walked right into Tel Aviv and nobody would have noticed until they were already there. So in 1973 they lose, the Arabs lose again, and the Jews kept all this area, including Sinai. After that, the Egyptian, there was, I think Nasser died, and then Sadat became president, and Sadat decided after that, I think he was president already in the 73 war. He decided, look, this is just pointless, we're not going to win. So he went and he got back all the Sinai. I think they offered him Gaza from what I remember, and they didn't want it. Because it's a population they didn't want to have to rule, that wasn't valuable to them. So they got back all the Sinai. And he came and spoke in the Knesset, in the parliament in Israel, and then when he went back he was assassinated. And then Mubarak became president. The Jordanians...
Was that in 1982 or 81, is it?
I think so, yes. Yeah, no, it wasn't, I don't think it was that late. No, I think it was 76, because Carter took credit for it, the Camp David Accords. Carter took credit for it, but it was really all Menachem Begin. So Jimmy Carter was president, I believe it was 76, because he was president until 80, from 76 to 80.
Okay.
So it was sometime in that time, and I'd have to look it up, and I didn't do as good a job preparing as I should have. But it was under Jimmy Carter, and so it would have been in the late 70s. They got back all of Sinai. Sadat came to speak. He comes back to Egypt, and then he's assassinated. Jordan in the 90s finally signed a peace treaty. Syria has never signed a peace treaty, and Lebanon never signed a peace treaty. In the 80s, there was there was continuous, even though the war stopped, they kept shelling. And Syria was like the only one I think that really had a good vantage point to shell from. And in the 80s, Israel went and took over the part of southern Lebanon, which was in a civil war anyway at the time, and they basically backed the Christian group in southern Lebanon, and they were there for 20 years, I think. And then what was the year? 2005 was Gaza, and I think it wasn't too long before that. I forget what the year was that basically Israel just ran out, and it like left the Christians hanging, and like some of them managed to escape into Israel and they were given asylum, and some of them just died in Lebanon. In 2005, we just so actually in the 1990s, was it 92, 93 I think it was, they had the Oslo Accords. They said we're going to start giving the Arabs like little bits of control. Now, one thing that's important is as soon as '67 happened, Israel was surprised it took over these areas, and it didn't really want to hang on. Didn't really want to hang on to them because they're filled with Arabs. So they tried to negotiate with Syria, with Jordan and Egypt. Hey, can we give you back the territory? And they said they wouldn't talk to them. So that's why they never really annexed it. They kept saying, "Oh, maybe Jordan will come and make peace with us, and then we can give them some of this land." They did start putting strategic settlements. In particular, they put settlements right around Jerusalem. They put settlements throughout Judea and Samaria, but mainly making like a bottleneck around Jerusalem, for two reasons, and also in Gaza. For two reasons. One was because they wanted to take over the high places and make sure that they couldn't. We had somebody watching, so they couldn't surprise us, and then also because they wanted to make sure like Jerusalem they weren't going to give. They weren't going to give back. Now I just went on a tour in Israel this summer. I went to Israel and we took a tour of East Jerusalem. And what's interesting is that the guy had two maps. One was from '67. And the other one was from like a couple of years ago or something like that. I think it was 2008 or something. And it showed the different Israeli areas in Jerusalem. And in 1948, when the Arabs left areas, Jews took over the land, and they said, "You're not coming back. Like wherever you went to, whatever country, whatever you went to, you're not coming back." So they also had camps that were in what was then Jordan, right, that they had run into, and then when Israel then took over these refugee camps in '67, so in '48 they took over houses and stuff that had been abandoned. In '67, they really didn't. Nobody left. So it was first of all it was only 6 days. They caught the Arabs there by surprise. And I don't think they really had anywhere to go to or whatever. So they when they took back Jerusalem, they didn't displace Arabs who were living in houses. They didn't say, "Okay, you guys are now moving out and we're moving somebody else in." They built up these areas. There was like all this vacant land. They built on all the vacant land. You can see the comparison of the two maps. It's like none of the stuff that was there changed. It was just like, okay, we built a huge community over here, like a suburb. We built a suburb over here. We built a suburb. And then they expanded the Jerusalem boundaries to include those, the municipal boundaries, because the boundary around the city is just whatever we say it is. It did not include the old city. Also, Jews wanted to move to Jerusalem. It's a big thing to move to Jerusalem. It is the most populous city in Israel. It's about half and half Jewish, half Arab, and but they're separated communities usually. And if you were an Arab and you owned a house in Jerusalem, and you want to sell, you can get a very good price for it, and you can go move somewhere else. So a lot of them had. and still do. There was a house in Hebron. Remember I told you they cleaned Hebron of Jews. And after 67, a very, very small group, we're talking about like a couple dozen maybe, Jews moved back to Hebron over the years, and they live in like trailers and stuff. And the one guy was showing us his trailer. We went on a tour a few years ago, and his trailer's full of bullet holes. This is a trailer where his family lives, full of bullet holes from some guy who just came along and tried to kill all the Jews. What was I going? There was a I can't remember where I was going with that. So they didn't display. Oh, so there's a house that just a few months ago, some Jews got together, bought a house from an Arab. The Arabs in the Palestinian Authority have made it a death penalty crime to sell a house to a Jew. So the Jews bought this clandestinely. The guy was went into hiding somewhere. He got a good price for it, and the Jews wanted to move in, and the government had been stopping them, and it went up to the Israeli Supreme Court. Can we live in this house that we bought? The areas that are in 1948. So whatever Arabs remained, and some of them said, you know what, we'll live under whoever. In particular, there's two communities: the Druze, which is a religion that's not Islam, it's not Christian, it's its own thing. The Druze, who mainly live in the Golan Heights area in the north, in the Galilee, said, we'll be loyal to whoever. And they actually, even from 48, so they actually have served in the army since like 1956 or something like that. The Bedouin can volunteer for the army. The Bedouin also they were nomads, so they didn't have as strong a connection to any particular country. So they do often serve in the Israeli army. They were all granted citizenship. Whoever was in the state in 1948 was granted citizenship if they wanted it. In 1967, they didn't offer them citizenship. The Arab citizens are about, I think, I want to say 20%. It's about 1.5 million Arabs and 6 million Jews. And then there's a couple more million that live in the West Bank that never got citizenship. In 2005, Israel just ran out of Gaza. And it's crazy because in Gaza they had homes, they had greenhouses, right? There's a very profitable industry there of what do you call it? Hydroponic, where they grow plants in water instead of in the ground. They had a very profitable business there. They had greenhouses. They had all these communities. They had beaches and synagogues and whatever. They basically the Israelis tore down most of it. Whatever was left, the Arabs, as soon as they came in, tore everything apart. I mean, it's crazy because you have a house. Like, why are you going to tear down a house just to prove that you own the land? Take over the house, live in the house. But they don't do that. Arabs do get caught coming in. So, like I said, there's Arab citizens, and on top of that, Arabs who come into the area either legally or illegally. Even if they're caught illegally, they're sent back. They may be locked up or whatever. Jews who wander into the Palestinian Authority, I don't know if you remember, in 2000, they lynched them. They just killed them, and they were holding up their their bloody hands on television, and you cannot go in there. You just can't, any place that's under Palestinian Authority control, I cannot enter. We actually went down and one time, you're taking a wrong turn, there's a big checkpoint, and it says, in Hebrew, Israelis are not allowed in Area A. And I said, well, if Israelis aren't allowed in, chances are we shouldn't go there either. But not only is it illegal, but it's incredibly dangerous for a Jew to walk into the Arab-controlled areas. And like I said, they've made it a death penalty to sell houses to Jews in areas that are under Jewish Israeli military control. Do you have the time?
Yeah, it's almost 9.
It's almost 9. Okay. So one of the other things that doesn't get talked about, there were about 800,000 refugees from 1948, Arab refugees, and there were about 800,000 Jewish refugees who were kicked out of all the Arab countries that they lived in the surrounding area. Iraq, not Iran. Iran let them stay. A few countries let them stay. But Yemen kicked most of them out. And I have a chart here of like how many, what it started out at, like 100 in Iraq in 1948. There were 135,000 Jews. In 1968, there were 350, and when this latest war in Iraq started, there were 37. When it was finished, there were 11, and I think all but like 3 have left and moved out of Iraq since. Morocco is a special case. They were actually nice and let them leave. Tunisia, 105,000 in 1948. By 2004, there were 1,500. So you had all these Arab countries. There were about 800,000 Jews that lost their home, often with always with no compensation, I think. Do you know who the PLO is?
Was it full
Palestine National Liberation Organization.
Yeah.
Yasser Arafat.
Yeah.
Do you know when it started?
Long time ago, decades ago.
Okay, but we had the war in 1948, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had the war in 67. We had, and then now they say, they went to the UN, they said, give us the West Bank and Gaza, right?
Yeah.
So when do you think of those periods? Pre-1948, after 1948, after 67? When do you think that started?
That was very recently. They claimed the whole area, Palestine.
Right.
Denied.
So the thing is when you look at their maps, when they look at the symbol for their organization, it's this whole map right here.
Right.
Now
they refuse, because the U.S. resolution at the very beginning, U.S. resolution doesn't have
UN.
Right. UN resolution doesn't has a legal authority. It's only a claim. The members can reject it or accept it. I think at that time many Arabic nations didn't accept it.
Which thing?
For Israel as a nation.
Oh no, none of them did.
Right.
And but when the UN voted to admit Israel as a country, none of the Arabs voted for it, but it passed anyway. All the Arabs voted against it.
Right.
But it passed.
Yeah.
And what I was getting to is that I have here I think it's one of the handouts I gave you. If not, I can give it to you if you like. You can also find it online. It wasn't very hard. The Palestine National Charter started in 1964. This is before the 67 war.
Mm-hmm.
This is when the West Bank is controlled by Jordan and Gaza is controlled by Egypt, Arab countries. So what were they trying to liberate? It wasn't the West Bank and Gaza because those were already under Arab control. And in fact, they say, they say in here that we have no claims on the land that Article 24. This organization does not exercise any territorial sovereignty over the West Bank in the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, or on the Gaza Strip, or in the Hima area. Its activities will be on the national and popular level. Okay. So basically they said, we don't want, our organization is not interested, and we revoke any claim to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So this is obviously not what they're fighting for. They're trying to drive, as the Arabs said explicitly when the partition plan happened and when the state was declared and they got admitted to the UN, we will drive them into the sea. We are not interested in making some sort of compromise. all through the period leading up to the creation of the State of Israel, they tried to make compromises. Ben Gurion had an idea for like a federation where you would have, a Jewish area and an Arab area, and then they would have a unified government. And of course, never ever worked out. And that's what we're left with today. And the whole fight over the West Bank and Gaza is really a joke, because that's not what they want, and it's not going to solve anything. But Israelis are desperate for peace. There's been rockets raining in Sderot from Gaza, which is the area that they left. Gaza is now completely under Arab control, under Hamas. But that's where they get attacked from. They don't get attacked from the West Bank, because as far as like rocket fire, because then we could just go in and get them. But because we've gotten out of Gaza, we can't just waltz in there anytime we feel like and just overrun the place. I think that ends it for that was the last thing I had was this one article. There are dozens of them about, they make up, when you see the stuff on the news, and you should realize that a good deal of it, when they say Israel did this horrible thing, is often made up. There's a famous video. There's a guy, a blogger. The blog goes by the name of Little Green Footballs, and during the war in Lebanon and everything, and prior to that, from the terrorist attacks in the United States in 9/11 until about 2006 or 7 or something like that, there's this guy who ran a blog who was basically, it had started off about bicycling and photography, and he started getting into the Middle East and everything. He broke the faked letter that got Dan Rather fired from the news, which had nothing to do with the Middle East, it had to do with George Bush. They were posting all of these, Reuters, where it had all these faked photographs, and he would point them out, and these would run as news stories in the Arab world. They said, "Oh, Israel bombed this ambulance. You see this ambulance in Lebanon with a completely circular hull right through the middle of it, with rust around the edges." It was an ambulance from a junkyard, but they said, "Oh, you see, Israel bombed an ambulance." It happens to be that the lights, the ambulance lights in Lebanon are circular. So somebody took the light off years ago and left this big hole. They had did you ever hear about Mohammed Dura, the little boy that they claimed that was shot in like 2000, and the Israelis said no, even if he was shot, which was hard to tell, there was a video, and it was hard to tell whether he had actually been shot. He's like hiding behind his father and stuff, and they said, based on where he's positioned, the fire would have been coming from the Palestinians, not from us, if he had been hit. And the one doctor said it was all a lie, and he actually just won. I had a note about him. Yehuda David, I think it's Frank, I think. He won a libel case. And then this one about how they claimed that this guy claimed that his baby's death was caused by a fuel shortage in Gaza that was Israel's fault, and it turned out it had nothing to do with it. There was a guy that they said Israel had killed, who showed up at his home. Like, there are tons of stories. I could send you dozens of stories about fake news stories that make it to Reuters, into legitimate news organizations. Especially in Gaza, they can't get their own reporters in, and therefore they rely on whoever the local reporter is. So there's a video from of this UN doctor who's supposedly performing CPR on this boy, and it's completely fake CPR. When you do real CPR, you keep your arms locked and you push your whole body down, right? The guy's going like this, really gently, like they do on TV. You know, like and this guy from Little Green Footballs used to expose him, and I think they may still have, you can probably still look up a lot of the articles and photographs and stuff that were fake from that time. Alright, we'll call it here. I think we may only do one more class about like mitzvot and daily life, and then call it for the season. But next class will probably be in this neighborhood. I'm sure it will be. There's